For our next project, we're going to create a rock, paper, scissors simulation. And what we're looking at right here is a finished product. We're also going to be using the console to show who wins and what the score is for each player. So we're going to be playing against a computer here. So we've got a computer AI that we're going to be also creating that will allow the player and the enemy to compete against each other. And the enemy will have a random number that they will be generating to select either the rock, paper, or sword. So it's a simple AI that we'll be using to allow the enemy to take a turn. So I'm going to go ahead and play this game here to show you what the final product is going to look like. First I need to open up the console. So I'm going to go to Window and Console. Now you notice a console is, when you think of a game, other games you've played or other types of consoles you've used, and most likely you might use the console if you're playing online, game online, or you're communicating or messages are being sent between users of a game online or between other software you might be using. It's a way for you to just add messages to kind of update and show what's happening within an application. So I'm going to go ahead and hit play. And here's the start of our game. And I've set up the controls so that when you press R, a rock will show up. So I'm going to press R. There's a rock. And the player is on the left side and the enemy, the computer, is on the right side. So in this case, if we look up here at the console, the skeleton wins. And the player scores 0 and the enemy scores 1. So I'm going to go ahead and hit P for paper. And so far we're not having any luck here. The enemy keeps beating us. I'm going to go ahead and hit S for sword, and enemy won again. So we can keep going round and round and round and keep track of our score each time in the console to see who's winning over time. So I can choose any combination. I'm just going to keep choosing rock. Oh, I finally won. I got a tie here. No scores added with the tie. So as you can see, it's very simple simulation to model a rock, paper, scissors game. So I'm going to go ahead and walk you through some of the code that you're going to be creating, so you can kind of see what's happening here and how this is actually working within the game to make everything function correctly. And then what you're going to do is I've put the code onto Google Classroom. There's 2 files on Google Classroom that you can use for this that will kind of guide you through the process of creating the script. Now the script is very long because there's lots of options and choices that have to be made within the code so for this all to work. So I've given you that script so that you can follow along on the script on the file and just add it into your script that you're going to create for this game. And then what you're going to have to do is go through and debug things if there's any problems, and then try to get that script to work so that you get a finished product that looks something like this. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and back out of here and take a look real quick at the main camera. I've added the script, the RPS script right here, rock, paper, scissors script. I've dragged it and dropped it on the camera. And so as you can see when you look at the script here, I've got a number of variables that we need for this game. We've got an E choice, which stands for enemy choice variable, that stores the enemy's choice for the AI. So there's a random number generator that will generate a 1, 2, or 3, and it will store that number in the E choice variable. So this is an integer type variable. Then we've got E score, which is an integer as well, which stores a number, which keeps track of the enemy score. And then we've got a variable called player score, P score, that's an integer as well, and it keeps track of the player score. And then I have all of the objects for the game, the rock for the player, and so on, and the enemy's tools that he uses as well. All right, so let's take a look at the script itself, and then walk through what's going on with the script. I'm going to open it up real quick. So in this script, it's important that you keep everything very organized because there's a lot of code in here. And the more organized your code is, the easier it is for you to debug your code if there's any problems, or to troubleshoot and figure out what the issues are. At the top, as you can see, make sure your class is RPS and make sure that that's the same as the file name, RPS. Then I'm going down here and you can see I've got all my variables that I've created. And in the start function, what I want to do is at the start of the game, I want to set all of both the player and the enemy's objects, the rock, the paper, and the sword, I want to set them active to false. And what that will do is it will make them invisible at the start of the game, because we don't want them all to be showing up on the table. Okay, so if I go back here to Unity, I can show you real quick. If I click on, let's do this. If I click on the the player's rock, right now it's set active. I can deselect it to not set it active, or I can set it active by clicking on the checkbox here. That command back over here in the code, set active, this command allows you to set it true or false, which is the same thing as turning on and turning off the rock, making it visible and making it invisible. So at first, on the start of the game, I want to make them all false, so they're invisible. And then we get into the update function. Notice how I have a comment here. This allows me to organize my code, and it tells me what I'm doing here, which is to press the R key. So if the player presses the R key, these are all of the steps that need to happen within the code. There's quite a few things that need to happen. The first part is, it's the player's turn. So if I press the R key, then the player rock is set active to true, and then what I want to do is I want to set the other two player objects to false so that they do not, they disappear. So anytime I press the R key, only the rock will show up and the other ones won't show up. Then I've got this right here. We haven't looked at this before. This is what we call calling a function. Okay, calling a function. We've been using functions. The start function is a function and the update function is a function. They are a chunk of code that specifically does some behaviors. And in this case, the update function, it's doing lots of different behaviors here. But when we call another function, like this one is called the enemy turn, we call it by its name, and then we add the parentheses behind it. And what we're doing here is the enemy turn is a function that I've created down below, way down at the bottom here, that looks similar to the update function and the start function by having a void in front of it, and its name is enemy turn. So when I call this function, its chunk of code is what controls the AI for the computer to take its turn. So in this case, what I've done is I've set the variable eChoice to equal this command right here. This command, random.range, randomly chooses a number between 1 and 4, but it doesn't include 4. It goes 1 to 3. So the range is from 1 to 3, but the way the command works, or the way this method works, is that it will start at 1, but it will only go to 3. It won't include 4 in the range. That's just how it works. So if I were to do a range of 1 to 5, I would do 1 and 6, and that would give me a range of 1 to 5. So it would randomly choose a number between 1 and 5, and it would store that number into the eChoice variable in the computer's memory. So then what we have for the computer is, or for the enemy, there's a random number between 1 and 3 that gets set here. So let's say the random number generator method here chooses the number 1 for the random number. It stores eChoice, stores it into eChoice as number 1. And then we have a checker. We say, okay, if eChoice is 1, well, what do we want to do then? Well, we want to, let's say 1 is equal to the rock for the enemy. We want to set the enemy rock equal to true so it shows up on the table. And then the paper and the sword can be false. We can also do another option, another check. Else if, which is your second option, your second choice here. Else if E choice is equal to 2, so if the random number generator gets a 2 and stores it in E choice, it will run this code here. If E choice is equal to 2, it sets paper equal to true and the rock and the sword false. And then our last option, we just put else. Else E sword is true. This would be our third option. So that is the enemy turn function that controls the enemy's code, the enemy's turn. And so to call that function, once again, I'm going to go back up to the top here. In our sequence of code, the player goes here. We call the enemy turn, and the enemy turn, when we call it, it runs that code below. And determining on what is ran below, we can then check to see whether or not, so let's say the player presses R and the rock shows up for the player, and then the enemy turn goes and it chooses R as well, and it chooses a rock. So we've got both rocks on the table. We have to check for that, and then we've got to figure out how to put that onto the console to show what just happened. So in this case, if the enemy's choice, the E choice variable, which was set down here, like we talked about, if the E choice variable was set as 1, which is set right here, if that happened when the enemy went, if E choice is 1, we're going to print onto the console by using the debug.log command. We're going to print the text tie, because it would be rock and rock on the table, and that would be a tie. When we print the player's score variable, and I'll print the text on the console called player score, anything in these quotation marks will print this string of text. Plus, I want to add to that the p-score variable, which will print the value of the player's score. Same with the enemy's score. I'm going to do this code here. And then I have another option. If E choice was 2, that means that the enemy has paper on the table. So if we have, the player has rock on the table and the enemy has paper on the table, the enemy is going to win because paper covers rock. So we add 1 by going E score, which is the enemy score, plus plus. That adds 1. That's a fast way to add 1 to the enemy score. And so we say that the skeleton wins, the player's score is printed, and the enemy's score is printed. Now when the enemy score is printed, a score of 1 will appear because we added 1 to the enemy's score variable right here. And if the enemy chooses 3, then that would be the sword. The rock beats the sword, so the P score would go up because the player wins, and then we'd print off the scores. So we're going to do that for when we press R. We're going to do all this code, and then for when we press P, we're going to do the same code. We're just going to adjust whether the player or the enemy wins here, and we're going to update the scores correctly. And then we're going to go down here and do the same thing for S key. When we press the S key, we show the sword on the table, the enemy turn goes, and then we check to see what the enemy chose and how that is going to affect the code and everything. So that is all the code that you're going to be using for this game. And there's quite a bit of code here. So that's why I gave you on Google Classroom 2 documents that have this code written out for you, so that you can either go and open up that document in Google Classroom like so. So I can come back over here and I can go to Google Classroom, and I can look here where it says I've got 2 things here. I've got rock, paper, sword finished code and rock, paper, sword fill in the blank code. This one might be fun for you to do, where it doesn't give you all the code. It gives you some helpful hints, and you can go through and you can add your variables. Then you can go in and you can add some extra code here. Then your update function, you can start putting in all of the stuff that you need for your update function. So it's all here for you. You just need to go back through, go back and forth from the code that's there into your script here, and then you need to add it in and then go through, and then if you have any